Welcome to today's session, Grantee Learning Series for COVID-19 Relief Programs. Please note that all audio connections are muted until the Q&A portion of the call, and I will give you instructions on how to ask a question at that time. Please ensure you have opened the chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. You may enter chat questions throughout the presentation, and they will be addressed at the end of the session. If you need any technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. And with that, I will hand the call over to Melissa Schroeder, Program Officer and Technical Assistance Lead for the Office of State and Grantee Relations. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for setting aside time to join us today for the Grantee Learning Series Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act, or FFATA, and Annual Performance Reporting webinar. I'm Melissa Schrader, and I'm a Program Officer and the Technical Assistance Lead in the Office of State and Grantee Relations. The Grantee Learning Series is comprised of 5 webinars held each week beginning July 26th and ending with today's presentation. These webinars are designed to provide a forum for the department to share important information and resources with our grantees to support your implementation of the SGR and EANS programs, with a focus on orienting grantee staff that may be new to these programs, while also refreshing the knowledge of grantee staff who've been working on these programs over the last few years. Note that these webinars are recorded and will be posted to our website along with the PowerPoint slides. This afternoon, we're joined by my colleagues, Britt Young, who's a group leader in the Office of State and Grantee Relations, along with Morgan Fagioli, who was a program officer and leading our office's work related to FFATA, but has since moved to another role. We have Jenny Cisse now with us, who is our new FFATA lead in our office, and also joining us today to take questions is Christopher Birch from the Office of the Chief Data Officer. So we've prepared a presentation to provide an overview of the FFATA and annual performance reporting requirements for the SGR and EANS programs. If you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to submit them using the chat feature. We'll also have time at the end of the presentation to take questions in the chat, and we'll invite you to come off mute to ask any questions that you may have. Without further delay, we'll get started.
Thank you for joining us today for the Grantee Learning Series. And today's focus will be on FFATA and APR reporting. The purpose of today's presentation is to ensure that all grantees are aware of the reporting requirements under SGR and EANS, and also to highlight solutions to known FFATA and APR reporting challenges. And for today's meeting, we will be reviewing the reporting requirements for both FFATA, the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act, and also the Annual Performance Reporting, or APR, for the SGR and EANS programs. We'll also be reviewing key resources available to help grantees successfully complete FFATA and APR reporting requirements for the GEAR, ESSER, and EANS programs. All right, so this is just an outline of what we will be covering today. We will start with the FFATA portion of the presentation. Right, and next slide. Okay, so we've included a table of contents just to share. When you're going back to this presentation as a resource, you can jump to the slide that would be most applicable to you. But for now, we will move on to the next slide. Right. So first off, we wanted to share the acronyms and also just quick links to the most used resources when it comes to FFATA reporting. So first, the FFATA stands for Federal Funding and Accountability and Transparency Act. The FSRS, which you will hear mentioned quite a bit, is the FFATA Subaward Reporting System. Also USA Spending, which is where the FFATA subaward data is displayed. And we've included links to all of these. You will hear mention of ESF, the Education Stabilization Fund, and also the ESF Transparency Portal, which is also where the subaward data is displayed on a monthly basis. And Britt will be discussing more about the ESF Transparency Portal later in the presentation. We've also just included some of the other acronyms for your reference. Go to the next slide, please. All right. So I want to point your attention to 2 CFR Part 170, which is the reporting subaward and executive compensation information. In summary, the FFATA reporting requirements are for first-tier subaward information and first-tier subaward executive compensation to be reported by the prime awardee in FSRS, or the FFATA subaward reporting system, on a monthly basis. The FFATA subaward reports are to be submitted by the end of the month following when the subaward was made, and it's only applicable to subawards of $30,000 or more. The requirement is for both mandatory and discretionary grants, and it is as of October 1st, 2010. The timing here is one point that is often a challenge for grantees. So good to remember that the reports are due by the end of the month following the month when it was made. So if you are awarding a subaward in May of 2023, that subaward would be reported in your June 2023 FFATA report. Next slide, please. Alrighty, continuing with the FFATA reporting requirements, a couple nuances when it comes to the initial award itself. If the initial subaward is below $30,000, but a subsequent grant modification results in that award being bumped to $30,000 or more, that subaward is required to be reported as of the date that it hits that $30,000 threshold. So I've included an example here. For example, if an entity receives $20,000 subaward in May 2022, that $20,000 subaward would not be required to be reported for the purposes of FFATA. However, if in August 2022, that same entity receives a supplemental subaward that would then bump it over the $30,000 threshold, it would need to be reported as of the date that it was bumped to that $30,000 threshold. So in this example, the subaward reached the threshold in August of 2022, so it would then be included in the September 2022 FFATA report. The other example that's listed on this slide is if the initial award was above $30,000 to begin with, but later on it's determined that the subaward should be de-obligated, and it drops that total subaward amount to the entity below the $30,000 threshold. So for the purposes of FFATA, if the total subaward falls below that $30,000 threshold, that award continues to be subject to the reporting requirements. So you would, in this example, an entity receives a subaward in December 2022 of $35,000. A couple months later, it determines that the entity should have only received $25,000. The prime awardee will need to go back and edit the January 2023 report that included that December 2022 subaward and change the subaward amount to $25,000. When you're uploading the FFATA reports, there is a description category, and in the description category, you could include a note to describe that the entity received the $35,000 subaward on this amount on this time, and then it was subsequently de-obligated on this date. And that note could help to document the change for your auditors. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we've included a few key terms, as well as the link to the Code of Federal Regulations Part 200 Subpart A. Please refer to the link on this slide for the full list of all of the definitions. But I do want to point your attention to the definition of a subaward. And for the purposes of FFATA, this is the definition that, that we use. And one note that often I think is confused is subaward versus subgrant. And for the purposes of FFATA reporting, grantees are reporting subawards. The prime grantee is responsible for reporting subawards. And so a subaward may be provided through any form of legal agreement, including an agreement that the pass-through entity considers to be a contract. I've added a link here to the 2 CFR 200.331, which is the subrecipient and contractor determinations. And we will be discussing this a little bit later as one of the common questions that we receive on the SGR team. Next slide, please. All righty. So jumping into some common reporting challenges and also solutions. So again, this is related to the timing of the reports, but when should subawards be reported? So subawards are to be reported by the end of the month following when the subaward was made. And this date is called the action date when you're uploading your FFATA reports into the FSRS system. And this action date should match the date that's listed on the subrecipient scan. The timing of the reports, I know that the description is a little confusing by the end of the month following when the subaward was made. But once you get in the habit of thinking, okay, a subaward was made in May of 2022, I'm going to include it in my June 2022 FFATA report, it will become more of a habit. And just remember that the action dates have to match the date that's listed on the GAN. I think that a common confusion is listing a date that the subaward was liquidated by. And for the purposes of FFATA, we are not tracking the date liquidated, but it's the date that the award was made to the subrecipient. All right. The second question, which we frequently get, is how should adjusted subawards be reported? And the correct process is to reopen the original submitted report that contained the subaward that you want to change. And you would go and find the edit and reopen button to make the change. You can also submit an overwrite batch upload, and it would replace all of the previous data submitted. So I've included a link to the Federal Service Desk, the FSRS FAQs for additional information on this. And note that you are able to reopen a report and edit it manually, or you can do that batch upload overwrite. Next slide, please. All right. So how is a subrecipient relationship determined? This is related to what I mentioned on the key terms slide. And so again, I've listed the link to the subrecipient and contractor determinations, but the pass-through entity or the SEA must make a case-by-case determination whether each agreement it makes for the disbursement of federal programs casts the party receiving the funds in the role of a subrecipient or a contractor. I think that this comes up as an area of confusion most often for the GEAR and EANS funds, but it really is up to the prime grantee to make the call whether they determine this to be a subaward or a contract. So please review this link to help determine the case-by-case determinations for each of your agreements. Right. Another common challenge faced by grantees are when you're about to submit your report and you get some ZIP+4 errors that pop up. The zip plus 4 is the 5-digit zip code, and then there's a 4-digit code attached. And what we've learned is that many, primarily rural districts, may not have a +4. So when an entity does not have a +4 at the end of their zip code, it's required to have a 2-digit congressional district code added on to their 5-digit zip code. Currently, the FSRS batch upload template does not have a field for the congressional district code. So when you are uploading a batch upload of subaward data, because the congressional district codes are not available, it kicks back all of the entities that do not have the +4, and so you'll get a bunch of errors. If you have errors, your report will not be submitted until the errors are resolved. So our recommendation is to remove the entities that do not have a +4 from your batch upload, and then continue to upload all of your subrecipients that do have a zip +4, so that those are all uploaded in the batch. Then you would reopen the report and manually submit the entities that do not have a +4 using their congressional district code. If you have any challenges with this, please let your program officer know. I know that many states have upwards of 100 or more entities that are rural and may not have a +4. So if you are in this category, please communicate with your program officer. Next slide, please. Okay. We received many questions about the FSRS batch upload function. And so I've included a link here to the FSRS Grants Batch Upload User Guide. Also on April 28th, GSA co-hosted a training with the SGR team to provide a demonstration of the batch upload function. And this training recording can be found on our website, which will be linked at the end of this presentation. I do want to note in regard to the batch upload that FSRS does not have any system validations in place. So when you're uploading your reports, if duplicates are present, or if there is what we call a fat finger mistake, that you accidentally add a digit to one of your numbers, and it bumps your total award over your, or your total reported subawards over your total allocated award amount, you will not receive an error or a system flag for this. So it is really crucial that you ensure that there are no over or duplicative reporting in your reports prior to submission. Another frequently asked question is, how can I access FFATA reports that are submitted or that were submitted by a former staff member? So if you have a staff member who is the designated FFATA reporter, it is likely that they are the only ones who have access to FSRS. The way that the system is currently set up is that there is one email that is linked to the award for reporting purposes. Some grantees have started to create a generic email account that is specific for FFATA purposes, and when grantee staffing shifts, there is a connection with that, that shared email account. In other situations, it is one individual who is responsible for reporting, and if that individual leaves the agency, once the replacement staff person is in that role, the new person will not have access to the reports submitted by the former staff member. In order to gain access to those past reports and be able to edit them if there were any mistakes or if anything needs to be corrected, the new staff member will need to submit a Federal Service Desk ticket and request that the past reports be migrated to their account. I've included a link here for the FSRS FAQs for additional information. If for some reason you submit a Federal Service Desk ticket and you're having access challenges, that the reports are not being migrated correctly, or you're still unable to access the system, please let your program officer know. And next slide, please. Alrighty. So we've also heard from grantees that when they make changes in the FSRS system, sometimes they are not visible on the USA spending side. So we wanted to include a question focused on this area. So when additional subaward data is reported in FSRS, for instance, a new subaward report that is just adding subawards, USA spending is automatically refreshed so that this data is updated on a weekly basis to reflect newly reported data in FSRS. The difference is that if FSRS reports are deleted from the system, or if FFATA reports are deleted from FSRS, it can take between 30 to 60 days for deletions to reflect in USA spending. And this is because the deletions require the FSRS support team to include the specific deleted FFATA reports in a manual deletions report that the FSRS team or the Federal Service Desk sends to the USA Spending technical team so that USA Spending can make the change on their end. So this is a manual process on the Federal Service Desk side, and so it can take more time. If you still do not see the changes reflected in USA spending after 30 to 60 days, please submit a Federal Service Desk ticket to confirm that your previously deleted reports were in fact included in FSRS's deletions report and sent to USA Spending. We have had some grantees reach out to USA Spending's help desk directly just to confirm that they, one, received the deletions report, and two, that their reports were included in the deletions report. The USA Spending help desk has been pretty responsive to grantees from my understanding. So we do recommend that you work with both the Federal Service Desk and the USA Spending technical team to ensure that the data on USA Spending is accurate. USA Spending is where SGR goes to monitor FFATA subaward data. So it is really important that USA Spending stays accurate and up to date. Next slide, please. Alrighty. So these are two common questions that are more program specific. The first is related to gear and when governor's offices award funds through an interagency agreement. Good thing to remember here is that if there is an MOU or an interagency agreement in place between the governor's office and another state agency that delegates the authority to the state agency to administer the program, the awards made by that state agency will then be treated as subawards. The good thing to remember here, though, is that the governor is still the prime grantee for the GEAR program. So it is still the governor's office's responsibility to report the subawards in FSRS. Alternatively, if the governor subawarded the funds to a state agency and there is no MOU or agreement delegating authority to the state agency, the governor would then treat the state agency as the subrecipient and would be required to report the subawards made to the state agency. They would not report any further awards. The first tier subaward in this case would be the subaward to the state agency. So we've included the link here to this. It would be question 1 of this FAQ. So please refer to that for any clarification on how to report interagency agreements or subawards to state agencies using GEAR funds. Another common question we receive is what should be reported for FFATA for EANS programs? And for this, I refer you to see G1 and G2 of the final EANS FAQs that were published in September of 2021. The big thing to remember with EANS is to go back to the subrecipient determinations, because the contracts that are awarded using EANS funds, it would be up to the grantee to determine if that contract casts the entity receiving the funds in a subrecipient role or that of a contractor. In most cases that I've seen, it has ended up being a contractor and would not need to be reported, but it is important to remind the grantee to make that case-by-case determination. One note, particularly for the EANS program, because EANS is very technical, even though the leftover EANS funds are reverting to the governor for allowable uses under GEAR, reverted EANS funds remain EANS funds. And as such, if any subawards are made of $30,000 or more with those reverted funds, they need to be reported into FSRS under the EANS Federal Award Identification Number, or FAIN. They should not be reported using the GEAR FAIN. If they are, what we notice on the SGR side is that GEAR will appear over allocated. So it is really important to be sure to use the EANS FAIN, or as SGR team frequently calls it, the PR award number. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so we've discussed a lot of the common challenges. Now I wanted to include some notes for what you should do should you experience a reporting issue. And the first thing you should do is alert your program officer. Program officers have seen all kinds of issues come up and are most likely able to provide you with a solution. And if they are not able to provide you with a solution, we can figure out where to go to get one. For FSRS system issues specifically, please contact the Federal Service Desk. I've included a link here. And if you are provided with an incident ticket number, please share this ticket number with your program officer via your state mailbox. We want to remind grantees to document your challenges and your efforts to comply with the FFATA requirements, and to verify that your subaward information displayed in USA spending is accurate. Again, this is where SGR and your program officers are regularly monitoring FFATA subaward data. And we are aware that USA spending can take some time to update. For additions, approximately 7 days, and for deletions, 30 to 60 days. However, this is the data that we are referring to when we monitor FFATA data. Also, we want to remind grantees to continue to work to resolve any issues you're experiencing. And if you are, diligently working to resolve your issues and you're afraid that when you submit a report, it will be late, please submit it anyway. The FFATA subaward reporting system, FSRS, allows you to upload reports, and then you can date them by when the report should have been uploaded by. It will tell, we will be able to see, or especially your state auditors will be able to see when you actually submitted it. But it is really crucial to ensure that your timing is correct. So again, if you subaward in example June 2023, your subawards will be included in your July 2023 report. And if you're a few months behind due to technical issues, Please ensure that you're dating the reports by when the subawards were made, so that those timings of the report month date and the subaward obligation date align. Alrighty, next slide, please. Here are some helpful reminders. We've received some questions about where to find your program officer's contact information. And this is just good to know in general for all of your ed grants, that your program officer's contact information can be found in Section 3 of your grant award notification, or your GAN. Another reminder that each month's FFATA report should only contain subawards made within the month prior, as we mentioned. And a reminder too that the FFATA report should not be cumulative. So again, if you are a few months behind, please do not upload one report that includes the past 8 months worth of subawards. That is not the correct reporting process. The report should not be cumulative in that sense. Technically, if you were making subawards every month of the year, at the end of the year, you would have 12 FFATA reports uploaded into the system. I know that's not really how the our ESSER and Guarantees programs work necessarily, but that's kind of the mentality to think about, that it's a monthly reporting requirement. Alrighty. Also a reminder for de-obligating subawards that please do not report negative subaward amounts. I believe in the FSRS FAQs, it says the system will not allow you to report negatives. The system will allow you to report negatives. However, it is still not the correct way to demonstrate a de-obligation. Instead, if a subaward decreased, you would go back to the original report where you submitted the subaward and subtract the de-obligated amount from that original report. Please do not report negative subawards. Another helpful tip is when reporting a ZIP +4, do not use hyphens. This can cause all types of system issues and end up bouncing back some error messages on the grantee's side. A reminder that the subaward data displayed in USA Spending is also displayed on the ESF Transparency Portal, and the portal is refreshed on a monthly basis. So at times, the data in FSRS that the grantee uploads, the data in USA Spending, and the data in ESF, the Transparency Portal, may not match. Every system has a little bit of a delay, but for the most up-to-date information, subaward data, program officers are going to USA Spending because in general, that is a weekly refresh. And if you have any questions specific to USA Spending, I've included the email address for the USA Spending help desk. If you email them, please copy your program officer or your state mailbox, just so that your program officer is aware of your efforts in trying to resolve your issues. Next slide, please. Okay, and finally, I've included a slide of FFATA specific resources, both on the FSRS provided resources that are managed by GSA, and also on the SGR side. We have the ESSER reporting, GEAR reporting, and EANS reporting web pages, which is where you can find recordings to our past webinars from February 1st and also April 28th. Also, just to highlight that the FFATA reporting requirements are also noted in your grant award notification attachment 9. So if you have any other questions, please refer to these resources. And of course, feel free to contact your SGR program officer. Thank you, and I will hand it off to Britt.
Thank you so much, Morgan. For those of you who don't know Morgan, Morgan has really dedicated herself to this effort to make sure that the data we publish is accurate and useful to the public. So I can't thank Morgan enough for all her efforts. So my name is Britt Young, and I'm going to talk about annual performance reporting. Morgan gave you lots of great information about the FFATA, or the monthly subaward reporting requirements, excuse me. And now I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the annual performance reporting requirements for the ESSER, GEAR, and EANS programs. So the annual data collection and reporting requirements under the COVID relief programs provide the public with an understanding of how states, including state educational agencies, local educational agencies, or otherwise known as school districts, institutions of higher education, and other education-related entities are spending and planning to spend historic levels of emergency funding. Our office, SGR, or the Office of State and Grantee Relations, but you'll hear me refer to us as SGR, administers ESSER, GEAR, and EANS, and we monitor grantees to ensure that they comply with the reporting requirements. So I'm going to talk a bit about the kind of data we collect for these three programs, and I'll start with ESSER. So for ESSER reporting, the SEA, or State Educational Agency, is responsible for reporting on the activities and expenditures, both the actual and planned expenditures at the state level or SEA level, as well as the activities and expenditures at the district level. The school districts or LEAs don't submit data directly to us, the department. I want to make sure that's clear. SEAs report on behalf of their LEAs. We're collecting data on state level funds or the SEA reserve, as well as the mandatory LEA level subgrants, which includes specific questions about the 20% LEA level mandatory set aside under ARP-ESSER that addresses learning loss. Very generally, and I will walk you through in a few minutes how you can access the form, but very generally, the data provide information on 4 categories of fund use: meeting students' academic needs, ensuring operational continuity, supporting mental health services, and addressing physical safety. Within these 4 categories, the reports will detail the numbers of students served, total spending, and over time, how these investments support individuals / student groups, including those most impacted by the pandemic. And again, in a couple minutes, I'll touch on how you can find all the resources you need to report accurately. And I strongly encourage you to spend some time with those resources. So let's talk about GEAR. GEAR reporting. So the governor's offices, as Morgan already noted, the governor's office is the grantee and therefore the responsible party for reporting for the GEAR program. In some cases, the governor's office might delegate those duties to the SEA, but I just want to make clear that you can't delegate the responsibility to subgrantees or other agencies. It's got to be the prime grantee or the entity that has been delegated with the administrative responsibilities of the program, for the program. In general, we collect data on expenditures as well as planned expenditures. The recipients of GEAR funding, so we want to know, were they school districts, IHEs, or other education-related entities, or some combination, and information about how you determined these entities were most impacted by the pandemic and thus most in need of support. And again, the Grantee Help page has a section for GEAR as well as for ESSER and EANS, so I can't say enough how much we encourage you to take advantage of those resources. Okay, and let's talk about EANS. So the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools Program, or EANS. As the grantee, again, the governor's office is responsible for this collection, but the SEA, as the administrator of the grant, would typically be responsible also for the data reporting activities. In general, we collect data on the non-public schools that received services or assistance, as well as the types of services or assistance provided to those schools. We also collect data on contracts. So if the SEA contracted with an entity to provide services or assistance to the schools, we collect data on that, on those contractors as well. And finally, and this is important, as Morgan said, once EANS funds, always EANS funds. So it's through the EANS APR that you will report on funds that revert to the governor's office for allowable uses under GEAR. So once, as you know, once the SEA has provided all necessary services and assistance to non-public schools that were eligible for them, then any remaining funds revert to the governor for allowable uses under GEAR. You report that information through this data collection, the EANS data collection. Let's talk about the timeline. So the data collection will cover 6 years of reporting, not including any liquidation extensions. We are generally collecting data in the spring, and data will be available in the fall or more likely winter for activities and expenditures that took place during the previous fiscal year. So data are due in the spring or early summer. The summer is used for data quality checks and the reopen periods, or that's what we call the time that is to correct data errors that the department identified. And I also want to point out that starting with the second year collection, the year 2 collection, we told grantees that they could use their state fiscal year. So in the first year collection, you'll see that grantees were reporting on the federal fiscal year, but subsequently most states use their state fiscal year. Okay, here's a more detailed look at the timeline and what we collect or have collected and when. As you can see in the table, there's a 2-year span between when activities happen in schools and classrooms and when the data become available. So for example, states for this year, for year 3 collection, states reported on activities that happened during the 21-22 school year in the spring of 23, and the resulting reports will be published in the fall or winter of 23. Also, I want to point out that beginning with year 4 of the programs, so the reporting period of FY or fiscal year 23, school year 22-23, data collection will support more detailed information, such as disaggregated student participation in ESSER-funded programs, and also data on staff that were supported by ESSER-funded programs. For more information about that, the more detailed information that we're collecting, you would go to the ESSER help page, Grantee help page, and on the data collection form, you'll find that information in the appendix. I want to talk a little bit about the process now. So SGR, again, our office, we coordinate with the Office of the Chief Data Officer, also referred to as OCDO, as well as contracted staff to support data collection activities. That includes the development of all the resources on the Grantee help page, help desk support during the collection periods, the review of the data collected, and ad hoc TA as needed. So I think it's important to note that we work very closely together, and this is a joint department effort. You may have heard the term editor and submitter. So we advise each grantee to have at least one editor and one submitter. The submitter also has the ability to edit, so that's good to know. Submitters may designate editors in the system, so you don't need to help reach out to the help desk to add editors. The submitter has the capability to do that. But again, we really strongly recommend that you have at least one editor and one submitter. And the submitter is ultimately the person who will be charged with, confirming, yes, these are our data and they're correct to the best of our abilities. We talked about timing already, but I want to point out that the collection periods are generally staggered. So for example, for the most recent collection, which was the third annual report, the ESSER collection closed before GEAR and EANS opened, and the GEAR and EANS collections closed a week apart. So we know that sometimes the same resources are dedicated to reporting for the different collections. And so that's why we stagger the reporting periods. In addition, we offer a correction or reopen period for isolated data quality issues. So in the end, grantees end up having 3 opportunities to get their reporting and their data correct. The first opportunity is during the initial collection period. The second opportunity is in the same year after the data have been reviewed. And then there's the third time in the following year if any errors are identified in the subsequent year's reporting. We feel strongly that the data we present to the public be as accurate and reliable. So we do offer these opportunities for corrections of previous year data. And then finally, I just want to make sure you're aware that communications around reporting will start in advance of the collection period, and they will come from the ESSER GEAR EANS help desk. And I want you to know that we, SGR, we work closely with the APR team to review these communications, to develop them. And so, we don't want you to feel like there's any disconnect because there isn't. Okay, let's go now and talk about the resources. So, Melissa, if you have, well, before we go to the portal, on this page, you can see that there are links to the help pages. And here's just a list of some of the items that you might find on this help desk page, on the help page. So there's instructions on how to obtain an account. There are recorded webinars from past year's collections. There's a fact sheet on UEIs, which is important. FAQs, or frequently asked questions on reporting. The actual data collection forms for each of the programs, and then the reporting templates that you will use. So, Melissa, if you don't mind navigating to the transparency portal. As you can see, this is, hopefully everybody has seen this portal. Morgan referred to it earlier. This is where the public goes to get information about our grantees spending. The subawards show up here under your state, and it's where the in your performance report data are displayed as well under each state. So if you scroll down to the bottom, you can see that there's a link to where it says Grantee Help. And if you click on that link, you'll see up at the top, well, first on the page, there's information about the schedule. And then there's some information about user accounts. So how do you get your account? There's the fact sheet on UEIs that I referenced. And if you go to the top where it says ESSER, there's buttons for ESSER, GEAR, and EANS. Those first 3 buttons are the 3 that you will be most interested in. So if you click on the ESSER link, you'll see that we have resources from year 1, 2, and 3. And if you click on the year 3 resources, which is the most recent year of reporting, that's where you will find on the far left, you'll see a button for definitions and FAQs. That first PDF is the data collection form. We also summarized changes from the 21 to 22 reporting, what the expectations are. That was a letter that was sent out to all grantees, the templates, there's a data dictionary, and I won't read through all of them. There's also an annotated form. So the annotated form includes comments that hopefully are helpful in providing you assistance in navigating. And also the checklist. I do want to point out, make you aware of the checklist. That's a really good resource to ensure that you're prepared. So we won't go through each program individually, but I strongly encourage you to do that yourselves for each of the programs, SGR and needs. Thank you, Melissa. So if we go back to the slides now, I just wanted to point out a few tips or suggestions that we want to encourage you to consider so that you are successful. So first, please review the data collection forms well in advance of the reporting windows. And, backing it up well in advance of your window for collecting from your your sub-grantees. Please plan to attend the webinars on reporting, so we hold them every year. But if you can't attend, then we share the recordings, and we really suggest that you review those recordings. Start early with collecting data from sub-grantees so that you have the opportunity to check for validity and ensure that the data are logical and consistent. We have received data that aren't consistent from year to year, where the number of FTE, for example, changed dramatically, and so in ways that aren't logical. So again, please check the data that you're receiving from your sub-grantees before you submit it to the department. And then lastly, at least on this slide, make sure that all the sub-grantees have UEIs, and that's how we can track data from year to year. Also, use the template upload tool. Completed reporting templates can be checked for compliance with the business rules. Review reporting resources that are available for each program. I can't say that enough. Review the prior year data to make sure it's accurate. And remember that the current year reporting will include questions on expenditures that took place during the prior year reporting. Previously reported data are available for review once you have logged into the system. And then finally, there is a help desk. So the SGR help desk is available to you. So reach out if you have questions, and copy your state mailbox if you're not sure if it's a help desk question or a program officer question. So with that, I just want to sincerely thank you for your time and attention to the reporting requirements under the SGR and EANS programs. We take these requirements very seriously. There is, as I'm sure you're well aware, a lot of interest in these programs from Congress, from the public, from the press. And so we work very hard to ensure that the data we provide is accurate and reliable. So at this point, we will now take any questions that you have regarding either the FFATA or the APR in your performance report requirements.
If you'd like to ask a question, you can go ahead and use the raise hand icon, and I will unmute your line, and you can also continue to ask your questions in the chat. This time I see one hand raised. Your line's unmuted. You can go ahead and ask your question. I think they lowered their hand.
I have a question in the chat that was asked earlier and is, I think, being asked again. And we needed clarification on what was meant by a subaward is reported in 1 month, but then the award is reversed and re-entered with the same amount under a different subaward in the following month. If you could clarify, do you mean that it was accidentally reported in the first month or that you de-obligated the subaward? Then we can hopefully give you an answer to that question.
Once again, if you need to ask a question or make a comment, you can press the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen. I will unmute your line.
Do have a question in the chat that says, are we able to include administrative costs in the APR report?
I just answered that in the chat. The in your performance reports include data elements or questions. I would encourage you.
Britt, we're losing your audio.
Sorry.
I believe Britt answered that question about administrative costs in the chat. And I believe she was saying that the administrative costs are collected in the APR. The question about whether the recording would be available afterwards. Will the questions and answers provided in the chat be provided to us in a follow-up email or reference? The recording will be available and the PowerPoint will be posted on our website.
I do see a hand raised, so let me go ahead and unmute. You can go ahead and ask your question.
My question was, I saw in the chat that you said that the year 4 reporting for ESSER stuff would be put out as soon as possible. I was just wondering if you had kind of a more direct answer to that. Like, is it going to be before the end of the year? Or is it going to be closer to spring when it's due?
We don't have an exact date for you at this time, but we will share the templates as soon as possible.
And once again, click the raise hand icon if you'd like to ask a question. You may also type your question into the chat. Caller, your line's unmuted. Please go ahead. And make sure your phone is not muted. Okay, we couldn't hear that caller. You can go ahead and type your question.
Somebody asked if we were, excuse me, there's a question in the chat. Should we expect anything new with regard to, in addition to what's in the appendix of the collection form? I would just say we actually anticipate sending out some additional guidance. A few grantees have asked us questions about some of those new questions that will be turned on next year. So we anticipate sending out additional guidance very soon on those questions. And again, if you have any specific questions, please reach out to the help desk.
See one more question in the chat. So the question is, as our subrecipients are allowed to cover expenses dating back to the start of the pandemic, we suspect we will have changes to make to year 1 and year 2, or year 1 and 2 and data in year 4. How do we best go about making these corrections?
Hi, thanks for that question. At this time, we don't have any plans to have additional year 1 and year 2 correction periods next year. If you know that there were issues with the year 1 or year 2 report, where like expenditures that had been costed to ESSER have changed, you should just make your most current report as accurate as possible with those changes in mind. But we do not plan to have additional year 1 and year 2 reopens next year.
And we have one final question we'll take before we wrap, and that is, should the year 2 report reflect what will be entered into the year 3 report? We have updates to make in both reports.
Thanks for that question, Caden. That really depends on your specific report and what exactly you're speaking about. I would definitely just recommend that you reach out to the APR reporting help desk with that question and with the specifics of your question, and they'll be able to answer it for you. They'll be able to pull up the data that has been entered and guide you through completing the year 3 corrections.
Great, thank you for that, Christopher. And with that, we're going to go ahead and close out today's webinar on FFATA and annual performance reporting. We'd like to thank you for joining us today. And just a reminder that we will be posting this webinar along with the PowerPoint slides to our website in the coming weeks. So keep your eyes posted for that. And as always, if you need any additional information or assistance, please feel free to reach out to your program officers. So thanks for all of your attention and your attendance today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining today's call and thank you for using event services. Your call has ended and you may disconnect.